the purpose of these masterclasses is to help us continue to develop education programs on that intersection that we work with, which is bringing the concept of sustainability through values and ethics in education. So I'm very happy to introduce you to Sam Crowell, who is here with us. And I'm very grateful, Sam, for you to take the lead in this first masterclass, not only because I'm a fan of yours, Sam, but because you have brought significant depth to the work we have been doing here at the Earthchild Education Center. You have been a faculty of our education center for many years and have been a cornerstone to our work. As you can imagine, our friends, Sam brings a vast experience, among other things, because he was a former director of the Center for Research and Integrative Learning and Teaching in California. Sam has been an elementary teacher, a principal. He has also been an administrator of schools and has authored and co-authored a number of books related to education. Before I give the floor to Sam, I want to inform you that we'll first hear from Sam for about 30 to 40 minutes. Then we're going to have a moment of interaction with him. We are going to split the group again for a few minutes, the big group into a small group. And that few minutes is to give you again a chance to exchange among yourselves any insights, doubts, comments you may have with regards to the topic that brings us together today. And then after the small groups, we'll come back to a plenary again. Is that okay? Shall we? Are we ready? Are you ready? Great. So Sam, the floor is yours, and I'm very excited to hear you. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Marian. I'm excited to be here with each of you. A little nervous. I would like to be in workshops with each one. As I looked at the gallery, I said, oh my, I'd love to have a conversation. So I hope today will be a conversation of sorts, at least to get things rolling. And I'm so thankful and grateful that you're here today and a part of this. It's very special. And I want to thank Marian and Alicia and the whole Earth Charter team for all the work they've done to put these things together. So thank you. I'm going to invite you, first of all, just to take a deep breath. And as you breathe, just consider the earlier part of your day, what has come before up to this point, and just give that some gratitude as you breathe in. I know Debbie's in Guam and it's 4 a.m. there, so she hasn't had much to happen so far. So the next breath, I would just like to invite you just to take in what's happening right now, what's around you, where you are, and the feelings that you're having. And I invite you finally to take a third breath, looking ahead at the day in front of you or the evening and your intentions and hopes for those hours that yet remain. Thank you for doing that with me. It helps me ground myself, become a little centered, but it's also, I think, very relevant to the topic. We'll be looking a little bit today about what has come before, what is happening now, and where we can take ideas and ourselves and our own unique gifts into the world. So I want to start with a question, just to pose it for you. Can we change the world by changing the way we see the world? Can we change the world by changing the way we see the world. How would the world be different if we saw it differently? Well, those questions have been kind of goading and been a part of me for probably 30 years as I've looked into the way we view the world and the worldviews that construct our reality. And so that's what I'm going to spend some time today with, looking at the way we've perceived the world to be and how that shapes how we act in the world and what we do in terms of our institutions and how we act within those institutions. And I've been, so I throw that question at you to hold and cradle, and I hope also the question will go with you when the time is over. I'm Sam. I'm a continuing story of my parents and my ancestors. I live on land that was originally settled by the Abenaki peoples and the Cahuilla tribes in California. And I carry the blood of the Aniyumiga. So I wanted to start there because I would not be here without those connections, without being a part of this ongoing story. And we all are a part of the ongoing stories of our ancestors and the lives that they brought forward into this present time and present moment. And I think sometimes when we begin to look at our lives, we start to look at the things that shaped it and the questions that arose. And in my case, this question of can we change the world by changing the way we see it? It started with me very early in my career as a teacher and then later as a principal, as I began to see a disconnect between how certain things were being done and then how children acted and loved and learned in a different setting. So let me just contrast that for you. When I first started in education, it was really thrown into the nature of objectives. What's going to be taught? How will we teach it? How will we measure what's been learned? How many of who will do what, in what, as measured by what? And we filled in those blanks. And we taught to it. And so I could change, okay, how many of my students, what percentage? Will it be 100%? Will it be 80%? Will it be 90%? How will I know? And how many of whom will do what? What is it I want them to do? Well, I'd really love for them to have love and enthusiasm and excitement for this whole area, for these questions. No, you can't write that because you can't measure it. And so I had to put it in discrete terms. And on, education seemed to be encased in these terms of goals and objectives and measurements. And I looked around and all of our institutions were encased in that same way of seeing and working in the world. It was a mechanical world, a world full of mechanism and machine-like efficiencies and understandings. So we viewed nature as a machine. We viewed our institutions as machine-like. We viewed our interrelations as one person and then another person and then another person. We looked at cause and effect in sciences. And then I went outside and we were building greenhouses with the kids, and they were building these structures and planting, and they were experimenting. They were mixing plants and looking and keeping journals, and they got so excited. And I wondered, how am I going to put this into an objective? And I didn't want to do that. We went down to explore streams, and we created an outdoor classroom, and they raised questions. They wanted to do research, and they wrote essays. And it didn't fit the model of how many of who will do what, in what. As measured by what? So these questions plagued me. And as I started trying to understand things more deeply, I became very interested in the way science was redescribing and reimagining the world that we live in. Science was changing and shifting their fundamental understanding of the universe. Rather than being a universe that resembled more and more a machine, it started resembling more and more of an organism, a natural organism. Rather than just seeing things in linear, sequential, first you do this, next you do this, next we'll move here, next we'll move here. They begin to see life in nature as not being so linear, but as being very messy and complicated and complex and nonlinear. But yet there were these patterns of beautiful order, patterns of order that seemed to result out of this messy chaos that seemed random, but actually wasn't. It was quite beautiful and quite organized. So those understandings coming out in biology, but also new understandings coming out in quantum mechanics that started to say, we're not so separate. Actually, we're not separate at all. And there's nothing that's actually can be separated out. We're bundles of energy and movement. Well, that really caught my attention because it resonated with how I was seeing the kids play in these greenhouses and exploring streams. It caught my attention because it started connecting to my sense of relationship rather than acting and doing and making something happen in sometimes a forceful way. So I began to explore these things and put things together and wonder if these could be applied to education in a holistic way. And so I used some of these questions to guide work at a school called Dry Creek School, where we started changing the way we believed about things and wondered out loud and with each other, does this change anything we do? What if we actually believed that things are relational and interconnected and apply that to our work? What if we actually believe that engaging in something is more than just observing it from afar, but experiencing it, and it changes us? What would happen? And so they explored ways to do this in their systems. And they went from being last in achievement to next to first in a year and a half. So something was going on. Something was going on that certainly the ones who changed their beliefs about the reality they were working in, they then started to apply that in ways that just energized the learners and energized them. They came back and said, I'm not the same person. They came back and started saying, something's transformed inside of me and I don't even know what. So I took this and more information and I said, this ought to be in a higher education program. We keep talking about the research about relationality, about constructivism instead of behaviors. But when we go to the university and we close the doors, we still see presentation. We still see inactivity. We still see goals and objectives and linear processes and sequences. And I'm saying, what would happen if we just threw it open? So instead of having courses, we created odysseys. Let's explore some questions together, see where these questions lead us, and see what we can bring to bear to look at them in a different way. How can we actually explore the way we perceive the world differently and where that leads us? So we started doing this. The very first odyssey was worldviews and new perspectives. And we started to see that moving from a mechanical worldview to one that is more organic, one is more natural, one is more organismic, if you will, changed the way we related to one another. And we created community, and this became the integrative and holistic master's program in education. And oddly enough, our students who were teachers became teachers of the year. They were being recognized. Their students started learning in different ways. We still didn't know exactly what was happening. But when you create a community based on other ways of seeing the world, that's more relational and connective, things change. The last thing that we started to do is to notice that there was a spiritual hunger that I'll talk about a little more. And it's real in human development. Psychologists are finding that there's a yearning for a sense of bonding, a sense of that's intentional, an intentional way of living in the world, an interconnected awareness of our place in the world, how we can feel the world rather than just observe it, and how we can see what can't be seen. I'll get into these. I know that sounds abstract right now, but as we began to look and question spirit, the breath, that vitality that is underneath the surface in our relationships, that sense of awe, that sense of wonder, that sense of imagination and real connection. We had students come from all varieties of backgrounds saying, this is speaking to me. And so started to see that new sciences started emphasizing non-separation and interconnected web, that matter is not just matter, but it's energy and it's flow. We looked at spirituality from indigenous perspectives and began to see that there's a sense of non-duality. Again, non-separation, that there's a relatedness, and that there's a connection with the earth, with nature, and the cosmos. Then we looked at holistic education and started to see what was there with holistic education. It's integral, it's integrated, which means comes into relationship. It's regenerative. As we engage in as a whole person, and we engage in whole experience, and we look at content from a whole range of perspectives, it regenerates everything. We found that holistic education, as we go in these areas, is transformative, not because it changes someone overtly. It's because the process of transformation is a process of undoing, of unlearning, and reorganizing our inner lives. David Pete calls this our inscape, not our landscape, but our inscape. And so when our lives become reorganized, we're seeing the same thing, we think, but we're viewing it from a very different lens. And that's what paradigm change and shifts all are about. And we found also that it's emergent. So I'm going to, I hope I wasn't overly obscure there. So why is seeing the world with new eyes so important? I think this is part of the Earth Charter's mission, to shift the consciousness, to view the world differently. It's a shift of awareness, but it's also a shift in action. Because when we become aware that we're connected and related, we act according to that understanding. It's a neural processing loop. So there are 5 ways that science and spirituality intersect, they come together. And one of those is that everything is in relationship. I don't, Miriam, I don't know if you have that slide. That might be good. Everything is in relationship. There are moving and changing patterns and cycles. And so this is something that science has certainly seen and noted and changed. Just the science of ecology is the science of relationship. But certainly the indigenous wisdom, ancient wisdoms of all times, saying that everything is related. So the term mitakuyasan is very, very important with this. A wonderful First Nations writer, Richard Wagamisi, he's deceased now. He has a beautiful, beautiful question. He says, me, why am I alive? Old woman, because everything else is. Me, no, I mean purpose. What's my purpose? Old woman, that is the purpose, to learn about your relatives. Me, my family? Old woman, yes. The moon, stars, rocks, trees, plants, water, insects, birds, mammals, your whole family. Learn about that relationship, how you're moving through time and space together. That's why you are alive. So this sense from the indigenous worldview is that, yes, of course, we're related. All things are related, but that's also the role of science. And science tells us the very same thing. It's an interconnected web that reflects everything. So it isn't just a relatedness, it's that there is a sense of interconnection, and that web of interconnection is very specific. This is the foundation of systems thinking, that systems create webs. If you look at mind maps, and if you've ever seen any of Fritjof Capra's beautiful work in systems, it's just a web of relationships and intersections. Over and over again, could just keep going and going. But of course, we create boundaries around these interconnections and webs. But it's a very, very significant aspect of science, and it's a huge, huge aspect of spirituality and indigenous wisdom. There are unities within unities within unities. Well, from an educational perspective, that means nesting. But let's look at what it means scientifically a little bit. We have fractal geometry that is built around a recursive format. And recursion is a mathematical process of self-similarity. But it's much easier to think about this if you're looking at a cauliflower, or if you're looking at a lightning bolt. You'll see self-similarity everywhere. Or if you're looking at a leaf of a fern, and you'll see the same pattern endlessly presenting itself. And yet each one is unique and different. So the world around us is full of these unities, and mysteriously so. And these unities are mathematical as well. They go on and on and on into infinity, multiple infinities. If you think of a hologram, and you can, it's an intersections of light, but if you could frame that hologram as and put it in glass, and you would break the glass, and it would fall into 1,000 pieces. If you pick up one of those pieces of glass, it would have the whole image in it. It wouldn't be a mosaic, like you have to put all the pieces together for the thing to, each one has the whole within it. That's what unity upon unity within unities means. A different way of looking at that scientifically is our DNA. one molecule of DNA has the information of our entire being. So these unities in science, as we begin to see those and see how they operate, these unities within the indigenous world and in the spiritual world is that we are all part of the oneness of the world. We're all part of things that we don't necessarily understand, but it's there nonetheless. So we have the fourth, the universe is more like an organism than a machine. I'm not going to mention that any more about that. But 5 is that consciousness exists. Now, consciousness was a foreboding term in science until the last 50 years or so, maybe 75 now. But consciousness is now one of the key questions in science. It's what is consciousness? It isn't just the brain, but what is mind now? Our initial research was all about the brain. Now it's about mind. The initial research was that consciousness was something that can't be measured, but yet we can't deny it. And so consciousness itself is a different kind of awareness. And as we shift consciousness, it actually makes us aware of much more than we know. We have beta and alpha and theta and delta aspects of consciousness, their energies. But one of the most interesting things is that the beta that runs most of our life, sense of consciousness, it only works about 25% of the time. Most of our consciousness is in the alpha realm. And most of our consciousness is we are not aware of it. So we take in the world, we bring the world into ourselves, and we also express the world that we're bringing in an outward way. There's that breathing in and breathing out that goes on continuously, doesn't it? So we have these things. Belief is rooted in the word beloved. Did you know that? Isn't that wonderful? Belief, beloved. If we believe something, it shapes us. It's part, we hold on to it because we love our beliefs. And we're not going to let go of it easily. Theory is rooted in the word theater. It has to be open. And meaning signifies significance, purpose, and value. So it's interesting that David Bohm, a quantum physicist, said that there are 3 aspects of reality. They are matter, energy, and meaning. And meaning is part of a sense of value. And so when we shift consciousness, when we start to reframe the way we view the world and what that might mean to us, it's going to be rooted in the energy and strength of values and the meaning we bring into this. It's going to be rooted in the sense of belief that we now are seeing and understanding sometimes what can't be seen and what isn't obvious. And we are playing that out. So,
and I'm gonna share the 5 points again.
Yes.
You had asked me to do this today. Now, is that okay? Yeah, so you can go through it again, just the 5 points you just shared. Can you see the screen?
Yes. I see one up there. Everything in the universe is relationship. Relationships are bound with complex interconnected networks. And interconnection is not linear or sequential or even directly causal, which is interesting. There are unities within unities within unities that create self-similar patterns. Actually, Maturana said that our boundaries are not separations, they're actually connections. Very interesting. So what we perceive as boundaries are really connecting us with the world. The natural and physical universe is more descriptive of an organism than a machine. And 5, consciousness exists. So I wondered what all of this meant for education and the ways we educate. And I began to see education more as a cultural project and a cultural imperative. Because as we look at our world, if we try to change or fix or even work with the world from the same sense of consciousness, the same sense of worldview, we're going to be replicating the worldview. Our actions will create our views of the world. It's just the way it is. If our views of the world change, we're suddenly seeing things in a different way, and our actions will move toward the way we are perceiving. It's intention. Our intention in the world shifts. That means our action shifts. Now, the root behind intention actually means to stretch toward something, to lean toward. So when our intentions in the world change, we're leaning toward a new vision, a new way of seeing and perceiving and acting and being in the world, being and doing. That relationship's critical. We're stretching ourselves because it's unfamiliar to us. To say that we start to intuit the world, to feel the world, to sense the world. That's very different than describing the world, touching the world. We're seeing things that can't be seen. We're feeling things that aren't obvious. And yet, those are critical in holistic understandings of education, which I'll get to. Alan Watts, you're probably familiar with him. He was an Eastern philosopher, a philosopher of the East, I should say. He was very, very interested in quantum mechanics, and he talked about a stick. I have a pen here, and where we often will put emphasis on the ends. Oh, here's an end of it. Here's the end. Here's an end, and we don't even view the stick. We're seeing the ends. Well, these aren't ends. It's just part of the stick. It's part of the pen. And so sometimes when we break things apart and fragment it, we fracture the world. We break it into something that's actually not recognizable. So when we break down content in smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, students can't see the whole thing. Who wants to know about this and this? But I can still know about this and this if I see the pen. And I can see that the pen works and writes, and it has uses and functions. And I like this pen. I like the color. It means something. Oh, I like this. Oh, I like it's blue. All right, it's nice. It fits nicely. So I'm relating to the pen. If I'm just talking about ends and ends, who cares? And that's a lot of what our education has been about. We fracture it so much. Who cares? Now, you might care because you want good grades, or you might care because you want to go to the next level, or you might care because someone expects you to care, but you really don't care. I have lots of international students, and some of my international students from Japan say, I do well on my exams, but as soon as I finish my exams, I dump it because I have to go on to the next one. So I can't remember anything that I learned. Ends, or the pen. You don't lose the ends when you learn the pen, when you hold the pen, when you relate to it. So important. Nora Bateson agrees. She says, we are context impoverished. We're impoverished. We don't know the context. This would mean nothing if I didn't use it to write. So even if I learned about pen, now I have a context. Now it's not just it can write. What is it I want to write? What is it I want to say? How do I want to express myself? Where am I? I'm in Costa Rica now. I'm in a room that has a bit of an echo. And so the context is so important. We are a part of the context. The context is not out there, it's us. So it isn't something we have to learn. We are in the context. And the new research in cognitive psychology and cognitive science says we couple with the world, with our environment. We're not separate, we couple with it. So as soon as I go out of this room, I'm a different person. As soon as I stop talking, I'm a different person. The context has changed. I'm only part of the context. So it raises interesting philosophical questions about who we are. Nora Bateson also says that development usually originally meant to reveal, to unfold. So when we think about development, think, oh, what's going to unfold in this developing person? What's going to be revealed? It's their gift. But now it's held hostage to a rubric of measurement and normality. Development now is within a range of measured normality, and it isn't specific. There's no sense of unfolding, of revealing itself. Lisa Miller, who's a psychology professor at Columbia University, she's founder also of the Collaborative for Spirituality and Education. She observes that the first 2 decades, context. She observes that the first 2 decades in a child's life is where it cultivates the neural seed of spirituality. That sense of bonding, that sense of relating, that sense of being attached, that sense of relating to the world. And so if we can, and she's done interesting research that shows the sense of depression and anxiety and lack of performance when we don't feel connected and bonded together with a larger community, with a sense that people love us and support us, that sense of why am I here and what am I about? So we wonder about these things. The biophysicist, George Wald, he had an interesting, or John Plant, I'm sorry, he's biophysicist. The creative principle of the universe and its organization and intelligence is not an external principle, but an internal one. All the past that we can ever know is contained in the world in this instance. And so when we begin to understand these things, we start to see the world that the knower and the known are the same. Everything you see is part of yourself. What happens when the inscape we inhabit shifts? So there's my question. I'm going to give you 4 things and then I'll stop. One of the things that happens when our inscape, when our worldview, perceptual reality shifts, our intentions change. The content changes. It's the same, but it's different, okay? Just like the pen. I can still have the content that we understand these particulars, but it's also different. What's more important is what I'm taking away. The content changes. Our community and sense of belonging is transformed. I'm not learning in a vacuum. I'm learning with a group, with a community of learners, with a culture of care, with a culture that has integrity toward the environment, a sense of doing no harm, a culture that wants to build fairness and social and economic justice into who they are, and a sense of well-being. So our community and our sense of belonging transforms. And fourth, an expanded and awakened self, living in harmony with myself, with others, with the earth and cosmos, and with the mystery of being. That also occurs when we begin to shift our perception of the world and see that we are a part of the world. We are not separate from it. So I want to read one more thing, and I will stop here because I'm probably too far along. But what shifts? Wagamisi again says, it is love itself that brings us all together. This human family we are a part of, this singular voice that is the accumulation of all voices raised together in praise of all creation. This one heartbeat, this one drum, this one immaculate love that put us here together so that we could learn its primary teaching. That love is the energy of creation, and that it takes love to create love. So I'm going to stop there because I have, when we come back, I'm going to be dealing with very specific kinds of applications. But before I do that, I would like to invite you in groups to explore a question. And I think, Miriam, you have the question.
Yes, so thank you so much, Sam. I just want to highlight one thing that stands out to me, which has to do with your question on changing our views. And by changing our views, the way we see the world, we can change our community and change the world. So one of the questions that Sam wanted to ask you is, how can we use these ideas? How can you use these ideas in your context, in your life or professional context? I'm going to put it in the chat box here so that you can see. How can you use these ideas that Sam just shared in your context, in your life or your professional context?
Yes, to just elaborate, if our views and our perceptions of the world shift, then what is your intention? How are you going to lean forward into the context that you work in every day? How would that shift? What would you see? How would you see that differently? What would be there within that new view of life and the world that may not be present now? So we'll explore those things, because I know you can't make your present context disappear. It is there, and we'll talk about that.
I'm gonna ask you, Sam, a particular question, and then I'm going to invite anyone from the floor, maybe one or two, if you want to ask or make a comment or ask any specific question before we split into groups. But Sam, you have talked about these 5 points that you see. Can you share again? It's 5 points that you see as commonalities between. What are those 5 points that you just shared? Can you remind us?
Okay, that everything is in relationship. So
yeah, but these are 5 commonalities of what?
That's the commonalities with the way science views the world and with the way ancient wisdom and indigenous cultures view the world. And also, they happen to be relevant to a holistic perspective from an educational point. So when we start to perceive that everything is in relationship, how would you do what you do differently? The second is an interconnected web. So now it's not only that things are in relationship and can't be even perceived outside of other relationships. What about multiple relationships and interconnection? So we're a community right now online. So how does that interconnected web, what are the possibilities there of an interconnected web? We're also quite diverse in terms of our international grouping here, our ethnic and racial identities. So what does that mean for the way we see ourselves? If we are an interconnected web and the world operates interconnectedly and moves and is always bouncing and shifting and influencing each other, then how do we deal with that as a mode of inquiry? As a mode of inquiry. What's going on with you? So if I see Rupert, or if I see Brenda, and I start to say, what's going on? Because what's going on with you affects me because I'm connected. What's going on with Waverly in Brazil? What's going on there because it's affecting me? And she's putting together a workforce cross countries that are looking at questions, and we're all networked together. What happens if schools and kids start networking with one another around common questions of relevant inquiry? Unities within unities, those are nesting. And so if you look at nest, like the Russian doll, what's inside the Russian doll? What's inside that? What's inside that? What's inside that? So can you deal with content that way? I think you can. I know you can. And actually, one of the best ways to integrate curriculum is not to go everywhere. That becomes, but to go deeply. Once you do everything, you'll see the connection. It's the depth. The depth reveals its own connections. Very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sam. So these are 5 commonalities you identify that you see in common, that emerges out of the new science, that emerges also in the indigenous traditions and knowledge, that we can also see in education. However, we don't see them reflected in a visible way or visible manner in conventional education. But these are certainly 5 commonalities that can be seen in holistic education, new science, indigenous traditions and knowledge.
Again, it confirms the notion there is no separation between feelings and thought. The way even information is processed in the brain goes through a whole filter. And we actually get rid, if we can't find a reaction, the brain is not, I say this in my neuroscience classes, but the brain is not like a sponge. It's like a colander. And if it does not find a connection, it dumps the information. So we keep trying to pour more and more information without feeling or values or meaning or significance or purpose, and it makes it harder to learn. When those are present, we hold on to it. It makes sense, and we're capable of learning so much more than we do. But we separated that out, and it's a really, really beautiful point. Yes. And I just say I've lost my train of thought. One aspect is humanity. When we look at content, we forget that disciplines were questions that related to questions about who we were. Okay, so I mean, most of science used to be natural philosophy. So it wasn't just separated out from the questions of the universe and where we fit in. And we have natural, most of history and biology was natural history. And so, so things, it all related. Who are we? How does literature actually ask questions about the existential life that we all, and feelings that we have? How does it inform who we are as human beings? How does art, how do we express the world through the arts? How does biology tell us about the living systems all around us, and how we can interact? So the questions that can spin out from our disciplines are not just academic questions like they've become. They are questions of human inquiry that inform who we are, I think. And if we can communicate that with students, it opens up a door where they can engage very specifically in the types of methodological inquiry that is necessary, but also it's pointed toward who are we and how are we connected in this larger frame. And of course, disciplines are arbitrary. Where does biology begin in physics? That's why we have biophysicists. We have socio-neurobiologists now, and on and on and on. So we find the questions of complexity in our world today aren't contained by a single discipline. So we're actually needing teams of questions and inquirers to look at the human experience. And disciplines are meaning systems within the human experience. And I think if we start to see that the human experience is also part of the planetary experience, now we see different and even more extensive interrelations. I'm sorry, I got on a soapbox. I apologize.
That's okay. So you had a little quick reflection exercise, if I may call, that I'm gonna project here. It's called circle activities. Quick, very quick. We only have 10 minutes left. But Sam, do you want to lead? What's the purpose of that? What do you want us to do?
Let me just offer this activity as an illustrative activity, okay? Not so much something we need to do right now, but it's a way of kind of tapping into our larger sense of identity. And so a circle activity, so much of indigenous thought and ancient wisdom is within a circle. So that's significant in itself. So if you were to draw a large circle on paper that's nearby and place yourself somewhere within that circle. Here we are. We're placing ourselves within a circle of experience, whatever else. But then start to add 12 other relationships that are central to your identity. It might be persons in your life that related to, it might be the place or places that you live or places that you are right now. It might, your relationships with roles that you have, a mother, a father, a daughter, a son, or a professor, a teacher, an artist, whatever it might be. The work you do, animals and plants, pets. In other words, 12 other relationships that are central to your identity. And then drawing connecting lines, you start to see that there are interconnections within these relationships and that they actually probably connect with each other in some way, but maybe not. You're drawing connecting lines among them. Add 5 more. And then imagine or draw a circle that encompasses your circle. And what would you place out there? And from this perspective, who are you? And the whole idea of this kind of activity is to get us to see that we are more than our individualized perspective or identity. I cannot define myself apart from you. I cannot define myself apart from the environment. I can't define myself apart from my ancestry and the place that I live and the history that I represent. I can't define myself outside of these multiple contexts And so what's interesting is that we can navigate and move within these contexts, and we don't have to lose that sense of who we are, that we embody and embrace the whole. And I think sometimes we can do this actually with information. And when we are teaching, it isn't that we have to have a whole different curriculum, although I think that it's past time that we do. But even given the curriculum we have, the questions, the active processing of experience, of our learning experience, can include questions like, what does this relate to? How does that connect to your life? What thoughts do you have about it? Are you afraid of that content? Are you secure with it? Do you have questions around it? How can you use that to imagine a different world? And how can you reimagine the world using this information? Information is meant to be imagined. What do we do with information? It's not meant to be accumulated. It's meant to be incorporated into our lives and into our imaginations and into our experience. And that's why I call this a cultural project. The cultural project is rethinking who we are in relation to the earth and to one another and to even the cosmos. And when we raise questions and have a different kind of relationship with our knowing, it's a grounded knowing. It becomes deeply part of who we are. Of course, I do a lot with physical metaphors and experiential learning, but when we are able to process those activities and those experiences through the lens of our understandings of the world and our perspectives, we constantly kind of move back and forth and gather our resources in a more significant and important way. And we have so much to learn finally from one another. I think the internet has told us, as experiences like this show us that this is a global, a planetary project. We all have different contexts and experiences and demands on our lives, but we are in this together. And to know that you're in Africa or in Kenya or Uganda or Italy or Holland, Netherlands or Canada or Australia, the US, Brazil, or Costa Rica, that we're dealing with very similar issues, and we're creating something here, creating something that can be quite meaningful and celebratory in our response.
Thank you, Sam. May I invite everyone to write a word or 3 words max on the chat box. Just think about anything that stands out to you from what you have seen and experienced in these last 2 hours. We're about to close. If you can encapsulate that in 1, 2, or 3 words of your takeaways from today. I'll give you a few seconds for that. And we would like to start seeing every one of you writing on the chat box.
Yeah, Rupert just, he reminded me that Jerome Harsty's 2 curriculum questions that should guide all curriculum at any age, at any subject level. What kind of person do you want to be? And what kind of world do you want to live in? And if our curriculum is not at least inquiring into those questions, then it's missing something very, very significant. Thank you, Rupert.
Thank you. Sam, I invite you to take a look at what people are writing in the chat box, as I think it's the voice of everybody
Oh, how nice.
Yes.
This is, this has been a wonderful experience for me to just connect and share things that are close to my heart. This is heart work for me. And I'm so grateful and so honored and humbled to do this. Thank you.
So it's great to see everybody's voice in the chat. I want just to acknowledge them, from Norman, Kathy, anywhere where you are. Your voice, not only from what you're thinking or feeling as a takeaway from this. So maybe I'm going to share some. So Anne is saying, well, Louise is saying conscious requires action. Anne is saying grateful, thankful, exploring questions together mutually, regenerative love. Alfio Odyssey. I heard, let me see here. Kathy said exploring questions together, mutually. Science confirmed wisdom, inspirational awakening, change of view. Just reading some, bringing your voice here. Jane says science and spirituality are interconnected. Beyond and within, like that. Recharging, imagine. Thank you so much, everyone, for.
Yes, thank you.
Rupert said living within the questions. That's Rupert. Carrie says so wonderful to learn. Okay.
I will
Sam,
say,
I'm going to give you back the final words, Sam.
okay.
We have 1 minute more.
I've done a kind of a shotgun approach to this in 2 hours. I will say that in August, at the end of August through September, I'm doing a 5-week more in-depth course, mini course on this topic, and where we'll go into these things in much more detail. But so thank you for being patient with my broad strokes here on this palette. Thank you for coming. It means so much to me.
Thank you, Sam. Indeed, we appreciate this time together here. The current times we live in really call on us to rethink about how we see the world. The current times that we see and the challenges, especially today when everybody woke up seeing what's going on in Europe and how we are interconnected, it calls on us to also rethink about what's the role of education in all of this in terms of helping us to change the way we see the world. But it cannot be conventional education. It has to be a new way for us to see the role of education and how that takes place. So I would like to close our session today by expressing my deep gratitude for everybody who is here, who took part in it in many different ways in our session today. And of course, expressing my deep gratitude and appreciation to Sam for sharing his wisdom and knowledge with us and inspiring us. I want to let you know, I saw Rupert mentioned about the Institute of Noetic Science, because there was so much talk about consciousness. We actually have one of our master classes is going to be taught by Kathy Wittnen. I think is in the second semester, and she was the head of the Institute of Noetic Sciences for many years. And she will also be offering one of our masterclass, Cassandra Wittnen. So with this, I would like to invite you to come back to any of the masterclasses or courses we are going to be offering this year. Again, we are offering a series of masterclasses and courses in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And I hope we'll feel inspired to really take this time to think and feel how interconnected we are and how much we need to change the way we see the world so that we act also in a different way. So thank you, everybody.